Yeah. Neil and I met up.
Yeah, he said.
Yeah, which was great.
Awesome. You had a good vacation down in Florida?
Yeah, it was a good vacation.
Humid.
It was really nice to get away and got to hang out with my parents. Kids got to see their grandparents. We hung out on the beach, had a beer with Neil. Thank you, Neil, for coming all that way. That was a long-ass trip. I did not realize how long that was because the next day, a couple days later, we ended up driving up towards Wesley Chapel. And I'm like, holy crap.
No, you just put on a podcast and you just go. I did an hour-long drive yesterday to a show.
I guess the one thing that my parents have sort of indicated, not so much because they don't really leave, but my sisters who were, one of them used to live down there and the other one still does. They're like, yeah, you just get used to driving an hour to something.
Yep.
It's just everything's so far away.
It's just an hour to anywhere.
It's like
hour to the beach, hour to here, hour to there, hour to Tampa. Sometimes you're lucky if it's a half hour. And you're like, hey.
Right.
Here's John. I'm going to let him in.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good morning.
Good afternoon and good morning.
Hello. How are we?
Really good. Thank you. How are you? Thanks so much for doing this.
Yeah. Thank you.
No, thank you. It's great. Hang on. I've got to hover over who's who.
So I'm Ben. Yeah.
And
Neil.
And Nate. Lovely.
Nice to meet you.
How are you guys?
Good.
We're well. How are you?
Yeah, good. Thank you. It's a busy weekend, but that's the job, isn't it?
Yeah.
Oh, so all good. And how's the year going for all of you guys?
It's good. It's good.
Yeah.
This podcast is we're on our 9th episode.
Ninth episode. Yeah. So nine months ish of doing this.
Yes, because you do monthly. Because I've caught up yesterday with Mike's podcast. So I started from the beginning and went through it. And
nice.
I just love how you've got this natural, really calm, straight off sound. And it's very easy to listen to. And yesterday I was picking blackberries in the woods and it was just listening to that, doing it. It's really great.
Well,
Lovely.
That's really
Awesome.
nice of you to say. Thank you. We try to keep it just easygoing and informal and short. I think the one thing that always drives me nuts is about really good podcasts have really great content, but they're 3 hours long, and I just don't have that much time it takes me a week to listen to an episode. So
That's what the speed dialer thing is for, isn't it? So that's it.
yeah, right.
Need to cram it in.
Listen in double
I do
time.
the same on YouTube. Yeah, 1.5 usually, unless you could have people and they're talking like this and it's, oh my word. But then you do get the odd person who's like, oh, okay, let's go quick now.
Right.
So good. Yeah. So we do tend to try and make sure we'll let you go at the end of the hour. It's not going to be wrong. I think Warren's ran on a bit over in recording, but
Right.
And I think
that's no problem.
I think
for me,
Sarah's
so
was our longest episode.
Was it?
Yeah,
Was it?
it was a good hour and 15 minutes of us talking on the recorded episode with actually very little cut out, just the sort of end post episode.
she's lovely.
So
Yeah, she was great. She was really good.
So yeah, we do try to keep it short that way, because we all have things to get back to. So
Stuff to do.
Well, yeah, I don't mind. It's one of those things. If the things are flowing, I mean, you could want to just eject me after about 20 minutes. It's like, okay.
So yeah, I'll do a quick intro and then we'll just get you to talk a little bit about we'll do the usual, tell us about yourself, how did you get into music, that kind of thing.
Okay.
And we'll just see how it goes from there.
Brilliant. Thanks, guys.
No problem. Okay. Right.
Hello, and welcome to Sound Discussion. Each episode, we discuss a music topic which we have all had first-hand experience with. These will be anything from getting started, recording, playing live, mixing, mastering, and everything in between. Most episodes will have a special guest to bring their professional experience to the discussion. Let's get started.
Today's guest is a mixing and mastering engineer, as well as creating an online music production coaching facility for people wanting to improve their skills and sound. His clients have included Emmy and RTS winning composers and Ivor Novello Awards winning artists. He's done a lot of work for film, TV, as well as Xbox, which is something I want to ask him about. So let's get straight into it with today's guest. Please, everybody, welcome John Elleson-Hartley. Hi, John. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Ben, Neil, and Nate. Thank you very much.
Yeah, pleasure. Thank you for being here.
So, for people who don't know you, could you give us a quick sort of potted history into you and your background and how you got into music?
Yeah, I mean, doing the quick version. Very much classical training growing up, and did some jazz in my teens as well. And when you reach adulthood, it's like, what the heck am I going to do? So pop out into the world being a composer. And that's how I started. And back many years ago, almost a romantic vision of a nice manuscript and a bit of paper, pen, and right away. But yeah, then you just learn about the technology that was available, getting into studios, learning the basics approach. And as a composer, doing a lot of production music, you've got to learn to mix, of course. And I had a publisher. I started back then, and it was about the year 2000 when I was asked by them to see, could you master this production album? And it's like, yes, you can, is always the answer. So that's how I got into mastering. And Sound on Sound became very useful at that, to just really double down of what were the specifics that were different. So it's sort of a less controlled mixing in that sense. You're using the similar techniques. So, about 2 years of doing that, about an album a month probably I was doing. And now I'm here. And it's just that journey of, how your life changes directions. And I didn't know I'd be doing this now when I started what I was doing.
So you actually came from a background of composing. Is that the sort of, is that the journey for you? It was very much, you started with composing. And was that composing just music in general? So I don't mean that literally. I mean, was that for sort of, quartets and orchestras and that sort of thing? Or was that always looking at film or television, or how did your composing sort of background?
I generally can't remember that far back now. What was the actual thing? But it was a direction of whoever I was talking with at the time went, oh yes, this thing called production music. And back then, when you were looking at production music, you would often think of it as your pension and how people could earn a lot of money off that. So yeah, that was just my direction. And it literally was doing anything from a kid's album to a full orchestral, dance tracks, did a salsa album, I think, at one point. Just variety in there. And that's what I like about what I do now, I suppose. I get to work with particularly composers, because that's where I started. So about 90% of my work comes via composers. And particularly for film and TV, you never know what you're going to get. It could be all sorts of styles. It's always lovely to get that big live orchestral recording, but then some can be really dark and dirty and synthy and variety.
When you're producing film, like music for film, are you working with the composer and the director when you're producing it? Like, do you guys look at the film itself and think, well, we need some, I don't know, that just seems like syncing up with the film and the director and all that stuff. That seems so complicated.
My experience so far, I'm not doing the dub mix. I'm purely working on the music. So I'm generally working directly with the composer, and it's about making their music sound as good as possible. And very often, depending on their skill set, they've done all their work, and then I'm coming in and say, what can I improve? How can I lift it? Certainly, I was working with a composer, Joe Costellis, this week, and doing 2 days of online mixing with her. And it's just like, what can we delve into? And there's things that as a composer, you're just throwing stuff out as quickly as possible. They're under so much pressure. And we actually grabbed the UAD free plugin, the Century channel strip that's been out at the moment. And we were probably using that several times on each cue. And just even putting the mic switch on, so it was adding distortion, because it was quite a dark, dirty score at certain times. Playing with that, very useful tool. But no, it's about communicating with them. I don't have the communication with the director side of things.
Oh, okay.
That's really interesting. I think it's something that we haven't spoken to anyone about, is that whole how music in film happens, how it works. We all sit there, and I mean, I can think of, we obviously pick out songs that we hear in films, and that's great. But the actual music in films, I think the three of us have no real understanding of how that comes about. And we see the fancy videos of everybody in Abbey Road studio with the film playing and the orchestra recording. But I'm guessing that's not most music for broadcast.
Because that's kind of what I was thinking. I was like, okay, so you got the director there, you got the composer there, and they're all just like with the film being like, again, like Ben said, this is a territory that we've never covered before.
Well, it's very interesting because I'm not really that much involved in it. I mean, a lot of the film and TV stuff I do is on mastering the soundtracks. I do work with composers, and more these last couple of years, it just sort of seems to be ramping up. And particularly when I can just dive into on an online session as well and control their computer. But then having said that, I'm just mixing a Sky documentary for a composer. It's got to be done by Tuesday. So it's like, I've got several days and I can just throw that in. He's sending me all the files in Dropbox. So that's a disconnected, fairly similar template in terms of instrumentations and groups, so that I'm checking, improving, and then that will go over as the stems, and then the dub mixer is going to do what they do, and they might change the music as well. They sometimes, when you there are times I've mastered a soundtrack and I've got one cue and it's that cue is really good. You watch the program and you can hardly hear that cue because it's just buried up.
Yeah, it's like, it sounds so good.
I think it's very frustrating. It must be for a composer because they put so much work in such a quick space of time.
Yeah.
Under so much pressure. And then sometimes you can hardly hear the music.
So on those topics, I'm loving this because this is something I know nothing about. I find this absolutely fascinating. So when you've received, you said you were mixing for, obviously you don't have to tell us anything confidential, but what typically do you get from those, in those mixes? Is it very much you get each string part on a separate track? Is it like I'd call a normal sort of recording studio session where you have a track per instrument and you do a full mix from there? Or do you tend to get almost stems of, these are the strings, these are the sort of brass section? What is it that you typically get when you're doing this?
Everything. It could be either or. And I think that's the versatility of the job. And probably like you guys find that I like the change. And sometimes I can be working on an entire mix. And particularly if I'm doing an online mix where I'm working on their computer and you can just dive in. That's really good because I can be hearing something and go, what's that? That thing there. I often just hum the line that I've heard because I'm not quite sure what it was. And then they can quickly scroll up, find that and go, oh, it's this. And I was like, can I bring that out a bit more? And he's like, oh yeah, go for it. Or should it be buried? And then this one that I'm doing now that's 10 stems. So sort of grouped.
Yeah.
It's an orchestral, but there's a sort of main cello line that's the solo part. And he's using the same instrumentation throughout. So that one is a sort of easier, being able to load everything up fairly quickly, line it all up, check it, because there was, sometimes you get clicks where there were edits and things, improve the sound, and then send them back.
When they record a full orchestra and whatnot, do they record each individual instrument, or is it just like a mic over the multiple musicians playing at once?
You usually get everything, so you'll get a deca tree or something above the conductor, which often you can establish the sound from that, and then using all the close mics depending on how much they do. But sometimes you get a recording where it's like the close mics, and you go, oh yeah, there's an oboe solo. Let's just lift that. And it's like, I can't hear the oboe. So it's not close mics like we would think about it of let's stick it a couple of feet in front of them. Sometimes it's like 6 or 8 foot above. That's frustrating.
I've seen some setups where in the orchestra you have the decatry, and then you might have some further back mics to capture the ambience of the hall.
Mm-hmm.
But then not individually mic'd instruments, but sort of groups of mics. So like in the string section, you might have 3 or 4 violinists kind of like playing into a mic, and then another 3 or 4 playing into a mic. So sort of like grouped like that. I've seen that before. I don't know how common that is.
I think it's just varied. It depends on the studio, depends on the mics they have, the space, the budget, and also how many parts do you actually need. I think it was like in your Mike's Seniors podcast talking about microphones and drum kits. And was it 4 microphones on one? So one for the main kick, 1 kick, 1 snare, and then 1 room, I think, or overheads, I think you said. And again, if you get it right, brilliant. So actually having too many microphones, I think people often think, well, I've got to use everything. But if, say, the decatry is set up nicely and you've got some outriggers or whatever, picking up some of the room, start with that. And sometimes it'll just do itself, really.
Do you ever get crazy phase issues with all the mics, the close mics and all that?
Yeah, sometimes. That again, you just have to check things. But every time is different.
I think that's the interesting bit about it is every time it's different. No matter how
you're solving problems, aren't you?
Yeah, you're solving problems on the fly, and you can prepare all you want, but there's always going to be a variable that's going to throw a curveball at you.
Yeah, I think that's part of the fun. If you're working with good people, and again, in that podcast, I think again it's getting people together in a studio and having fun. Yeah. If you can do that, that's brilliant. But even if like this, I'm often working with somebody. I mean, one of my composers I worked with a lot, Marcus Hedges, he does video game music, and he's also got this thing called the Trend Orchestra, where he does orchestrations of old video game music. So you listen to the original, and it's like this 8-bit weird thing, and he's fully orchestrated it by ear. Absolutely amazing.
Wow.
But there was a time where I'd listen to his mixes as a WhatsApp audio, and it would be like, oh, that's good. And so, oh, what the heck is that? Or, oh, is that horn solo supposed to be that quiet or weedy? It's that sort of feedback. And he kind of liked that because he's actually hearing at the time that you're making the reaction. And I think that's, depending on who you're working with, having that bit of fun, bit of lightness, and just making it all that they're happy at the end of it. Because that's the point. We are a service and an experience that they come away going, my music is now better and I'm happy to let it go out into the world.
Yeah, definitely. That's, I think a few of those things are topics that come up in our podcasts over and over again. It's the best things happen when you work with other people who all have the same vision and want to do the same thing. And I think that the one thing I've heard so many times from everybody we've spoken to is the fact that it's a service. All music is a service. So whether you're a producer or a mastering engineer or a recording engineer, it is about making that, whether it's the original artist or so I do mastering as well. So I get finished mixes. So the person I have to keep happy is the person who sent me the mix. And obviously you try and make it better. Do no harm, as Ian Shepherd would say. I think it is an art form, but especially in the positions that we're in, a lot of us, Nate and Neil. I mean, Neil does live performance, so he's very much the live performer of the group. But Nate and I, it is a service, as you say. It's about having clients that, at the end of the day, they want to be able to release it to the world as a better thing. So, yeah, I think. So I've got so many questions in my head. So when you get to you obviously do mixing and mastering. So when you're mastering for something like a TV program or a film or whatever, is it different to mastering an album or mastering an EP? Is it technically a different discipline, or you do very much the same thing about level balance and overall tonal shape across everything? I'm really interested as to what the differences are, sort of.
Yeah, but it is the same for me if I'm working with the composer and I'm not doing the dub, where they're having to work in the sound effects and the Foley and the dialogue as well. So sometimes if the music's, they will then start changing the music, or they might take the mids out or something if the mix hasn't been done that way. Because very often I don't actually know, like this documentary, I don't know what the thing is like. I just know what the music is like, and then that's going to be adjusted when they put the final program together. My job in that sense is just to improve the instruments, make it sound better in that mix. So that's not a master. Although sometimes you can master tracks that will then go in because they're mixed, and that can be done in the sense of you can master it for the program, and then it's ready to be released as the soundtrack as well. So same, I've done that with a few games where these tracks have come in, so they've got it mastered, and then it's ready to release. So,
oh, okay. It's really interesting. Yeah, very good.
It's flexibility, I suppose. There's no one way of doing anything, is there? I suppose what you guys would find, and a client, we have our own way of doing something, but they might go, oh no, that's too bright, or that's it. Oh, okay. Well, then that's their seasoning. I tend to think of it as food sometimes. How much seasoning are you putting in? Some people have different preferences.
Yeah, no, that explains it pretty clearly, and it's very accurate. Yeah,
amazing. So when we spoke to you, well, when I messaged you, we had a sort of topic for the episode, because we try and have a loose topic for the episode. They seem to get loose. Okay, yeah. They seem to get looser every episode, to be brutally honest. But and
it's a guideline.
It's a guideline, and it was really around your mastering work. And one of the things that I get asked a lot from clients is, am I allowed to put any processing on my mix bus? And I find it a bizarre topic. I've got to be honest, because I'll get what you send me. As a mastering engineer, I don't know what you've done. You don't have to tell me. I always say, don't put a limiter on it and make sure it doesn't clip, but I don't really have any complaints after that. But yeah, that was the topic for this episode. And I'd love to get sort of your thoughts on, it's not do's and don'ts for when you're sending stuff to you for mastering, but that whole, where does their mix finish and your master start?
That again is the simple response of it depends. And I'm very much like you, where sometimes you get what you get, and then that's all you got to work with. And that might be slammed with a limiter on. And it's like, no, that's what I want. Okay. And then you've got to do your thing. But usually if people are asking, what should I have on? You can advise. And what you've just said, so no limiter, no clipping, preferably a bit of headroom. Even that, I often say, as long as it's not clipping, but if you can get 3 to 6 dB headroom, you can even have like -10 at least with 24-bit files easily. So, but a lot of people, depending on how they've mixed, they may have automation on faders where, if you're not then going everything to buses, where you could just simply pull the buses down so that you've got some headroom at the end. That can be too complicated for some people. They're just not set up. So as long as it's not clipping, and you've got a little bit of headroom, that'll be fine. As for processing on the stereo bus, again, who cares? Does it sound right? But I always ask, and even when I'm mixing, it's like, what's that doing? So why have you put that there? So is it fundamental to the sound of the mix, or is it just there because you do it all the time? Which again isn't a wrong way of doing it either. That can be part of your sound, and particularly if you mix into it. So yeah, I'm very much, if it is part of the sound, leave it. If not, turn it off.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of saying that, because you could really apply that same concept to an artist creating a song and then sending those tracks to be mixed. They could send a vocal with a reverb send on that vocal and a delay and whatever else. or they could bake it into the vocal, and that's that. You can't unbake that cake. So,
Perfect.
If that's the sound, then send it. That's, don't leave it to the mixing engineer to say, oh, well, I think some, this type of reverb is going to sound great on this. Well, that may not be what the artist intended. If that's the case, then the artist should have sent you what they wanted to hear. And that is with the reverb baked in, or, a separate send track of that effect with a note saying, here's the sound I'm going for, I know that like with mastering, in the few conversations I've had, both with Ben and some other mastering engineers, the comment will be, well, send me a 2 mix of your song with everything on the master bus. Let me hear what you're listening to. And then send me one with nothing. Right. And maybe they'll take a choice between the two. If the one with everything on it sounds great and they can work with it, awesome. If the one without any processing on it is good and they can hear the end result that they're going for, the mastering engineer can probably recreate that even better and get them that result. I think, again, it just depends on the type of like documentation, the notes you're leaving for whoever's going to do the job.
Yeah, it also depends on the person and their involvement in their track. How confident are they in what they're doing? And this is what I want. So if they turn it all off and it changes the mix, then even the mastering engineer is going to be going, oh, I can't quit. And then they're not good. The client isn't going to be happy because it's like, no, it's missing that thing.
Yeah.
But if they've just shoved a tape on or something else that's like, yeah, well, it just did something. But if it's also adding a bit of compression that you can hear because it's driving the tape too hard or something, so yeah, can we take that off and then I can put some life back in and then maybe add that after. It's a discussion. You've got to, as you say, like with notes or talking with the client, you've got to give feedback. And what do they want? And they'll know. And it's very often I say, rather than how does it sound, it's like, how does it feel? Because it's a feel industry. It's art. It's like, does it make you go, oh, yeah, that's it. That's the one. Or is it like, there's just something not quite right. You've got to have them going, love it. That's right. Whatever that is.
I have a question about mastering for film. I know when you master a song, we like with the loudness wars of the past couple decades and whatnot, everybody's trying to limit, and make it as loud as possible. With film and TV, do you try to do the same thing, or do you leave room for dynamics throughout because it's going to be used in film?
It's generally, I'm not mastering for the film. That will be the soundtrack when that's released. Okay. Because generally the music's pretty dynamic when it's in a film. But again, it depends. It might not be a dynamic soundtrack. But for the soundtrack release, no, it's very much like my normal approach, where I don't have to be silly loud. I just want it above, a couple of dB above what the streaming are after. So I know it's not going to be too quiet, but it'll probably be turned down a couple of decibels. And then I'm happy. And it also depends on the music, like always, isn't it? You're serving the client and the music. Mm-hmm. What does it need? And then what do they want? Because sometimes they will compare to another composer's music and they go, can we have it a bit louder? And I'm like, right. Do they want it a bit more squashed? Or sometimes I get that, this has got to have this dark edge, mess with it, go for it. And you start rubbing your hands together with glee and going, whoa, okay, how can I add some sort of dirtiness to this track? And that's then fun. And I think I get that more with composers than artists, because they're creating a tone for that film.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I guess an artist is very much writing songs or a topic for an EP or album, whereas I guess composers, especially for TV and film, are creating a soundscape for what the film will audibly feel like when you're watching the pictures. I guess that's quite I hadn't thought of that.
Yeah, I also like certainly the way that I've been lucky to do stuff for mastering soundtracks is it's not what you're going to hear so much in the program or the film, because often it could be mixed where there's a lot of bass end, so that you don't have a lot of mids or bright thing that's going to really stand out and take up space in the sound of the film. But I can often bring that up so it's more to listen to rather than just what's in the film. Because sometimes you can hear a soundtrack and you think, oh, this is going to be great. And then, is that it? Is that has this actually been mastered? And I get some purist approach, I suppose, where it's like, yeah, but that's what you heard in the film. But generally, with a lot of composers I work with, it's just about how can you make the music that was in the TV or film sound better when somebody comes to listen to it. And hopefully that would also then inspire somebody to go and watch it.
Yeah, I'd never thought of somebody hearing the soundtrack before seeing the film, if you see what I mean.
That's a weird one, because I'm enjoying the music. And then you actually go, oh, let's go. And if the music's good, then the actual thing has to be good. And then I'll watch it and go, yeah, I really like that. And the music, and I suppose I'm more pumped to watch it then. And then you often don't get to hear it that much, though, that's the slight frustration. But I think there's very much if the music's bothering you or you're noticing the music, then the composer or the mix is wrong. It should be there to accompany, and it's essential, but it shouldn't be taking over unless it's a heavy music part of the thing that you're watching.
Yeah, that's definitely true. And I tend to pick out music when I'm watching a film or even a documentary, because especially a documentary, there's going to be moments where that music evokes an emotion from you and you don't quite realize it until maybe you sort of get some clarity at a point. And you're like, this music is doing something to me. Right. But you're right. It shouldn't really be noticed, heard, but not really noticed. And if you're noticing it, it could be that something's not being done right. Mm-hmm. But also sometimes, you hear a great song pop up on a movie and you're like, yeah, this is an awesome song and it's working really well for the scene.
Sometimes the music makes the movie. I mean,
sometimes,
look at John
the
Williams.
Music makes the movie.
Look at John Williams and every movie that he's ever touched. I mean, yes, the movies are great, but can you imagine Jurassic Park without that theme or all those themes and whatnot? And
I think one of the things for me is when I get done with a movie and I really enjoyed it. Let's take for example, Inception. Mm-hmm. Literally the next day after I watched that movie, I went and listened to the soundtrack from the score from start to finish, because it left that much of an impression on me, and it's still one of my most favorite movie scores of all time. Just the brass and the composition of it all, just it sends chills down my spine every single time that I hear it. So yeah, there's times where I'll get done with a movie or I'll hear a song and I make a note to go back and see what was that song that I was hearing. I like that. I'd like to hear the full version or just, what it was inspired from if it was an original composition. So.
And we're so lucky that we can just literally straight away go and listen to it wherever we are. So you've just watched it. Right, I'm going to do that.
Yeah.
And also just the essentialness of music, but how, when they'll recut or somebody just takes another different music to a scene, totally changes it. So that's the skill of the composer and then working with the director to bring their vision to light of does it all work? And I'm always in awe with what composers can create that then gives us the feels that's right for the picture.
And that's happened a few times. A theatrical release might have a certain song, and then when it gets released on physical media or TV, they have to change it for whatever reason because of licensing. That's happened a few times. I think I've heard that. Not sure if you've run into that in your work. No? Okay.
No.
That could be really interesting, couldn't it? Because if you went to see it at the cinema, at the theatre, and then came out and watched it a year later at home, you'd be like, That wasn't the song that was there. I haven't noticed that. I'll have to keep my eyes open for that one. That could be quite.
I can't give an example, but I know that I've noticed it once or twice, and I've heard that same sentiment from people. Like the music was different. I don't know how. So maybe I'm totally off. Maybe I'm completely wrong here, and I'm just making something up. But I'm pretty sure that I've come across that before. But I don't have any examples to back it up. So.
Well, I mean, I haven't had that, but the one thing I've done sometimes with the soundtrack is that music that hasn't been in the film, it was written for the film, but sometimes, the composers, they're just writing so much, or the director starts to go, well, yeah, we're going to use that one instead of that one.
Yeah.
And the composer then can have a certain amount of control when they come to pick through all the tons of music that they can write and go, yeah, we're going to put these tracks in as well as extra. Because it's all part of the sound, a similar sound. Because very much there's a sort of homogenous tone throughout a film most of the time. That's one thing that I like when I get a soundtrack. So you're not just mastering different sounding types of tracks or anything particularly. They've got a reasonable tone that's similar throughout.
Another question for you in along this thread, and maybe we could tie this into the bus processing thing, and that is the music that you're creating for films or music that you're mixing for films. Does any of that end up going into a Dolby mix and being processed for Atmos?
I don't know, because again, that's out of my control at that point, because I'm not doing the dub mix.
Oh, okay. So you're only doing the 2-bus processing?
Yeah, I've always been stereo. Sure. And I think I've turned down 2 or 3 jobs in my entire career that's like, I use that? No, sadly not. It's something that I always think, should I, even Atmos, where it's kind of like, should I start thinking about it? But generally, I'm still not getting lots of people talking about, I enjoyed this listening to it. All I'm seeing is people talking about they've set up a studio, and the speaker company is saying, yes, we've set up this studio, because they're making, I think it was PMC, they were doing a video once and it's like, well, it's good for speaker companies. And, the amount of money, if you're going to do it properly, I don't know. It's very useful. It has its roles, but for music to listen to, I don't know yet. It's certainly in films and and games particularly.
Yeah,
it's definitely something I've not been asked for at all. No one has said to me, "I've got the latest version of Logic and I've mixed in Atmos. Can you master it for Atmos?" I've not had any of my clients say that to me, because it goes on to Spotify, it goes on to Apple Music, it goes on, and I know they have started to now be able to do Atmos, but most people just listen. They just want the stereo master done. So,
well, I suppose it's a lot when you think, well, it's just pushing the format at a time, because even Apple, where, as far as I'm aware, I haven't heard of, I'm sure there are artists who are mixing in Atmos, but a studio will get the master of the song, and then they're getting the track, which they convert into Atmos. But when it renders down to the stereo, it needs to match the master. It'll be quieter. So they're not creating an Atmos mix for you to enjoy, and that goes down. They're doing it backwards.
Yeah.
So it's not like the artists are going, I must create this in Atmos and have all this amazing thing that's happening, and it's very arty. They still just do a normal track in stereo.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah, I think it's mostly I think at this point still it's probably mostly the labels that are asking for an Atmos mix of a record. And at that point, they have all the individual tracks and the stems, and, the Atmos mixer can go and do what they do. But I guess I can't say with 100% certainty, but I'm probably certain that most artists aren't writing a record with the idea of this is going to be done in Atmos. Probably not.
Well, they're not set up, are they? I suppose, we've got our stereo setups.
Right.
And they will have that, or headphones. So they can't create it. They would have to invest and set up something, and then really delve into it.
Or work closely with an Atmos mixer to make sure that, they the elements are being placed where the artist wants and sort of creating this vision as it goes along. I don't know how often that's happening. I certainly am not. I haven't worked with Atmos at all. No one's asking me about it. Why would they? Not, and I'm not listening to Atmos mixes at all. So I don't know.
I mean, there's I can't. It's something paint. I could be having that completely wrong. But Anita decided the music for. I'm brilliant with names. Trying to remember them, but it's this health and mental health game. Being I'm trying to explain this. So with a VR headset on, it's being able to have control and disconnection and do therapy, disconnect from the real world. And you can put them. So the music in that sense, that's using Atmos, which for me is a brilliant idea. They can change it. They can then. I believe they're painting something in what they're calling it a game. So that's really useful. And I think that's a great use of it. But then that was generated for and being in Atmos for that reason. So that makes sense. And it has a real world application. But just for music where, you can get cars with Atmos in, nice Mercedes, and it's got Atmos. Aren't you supposed to be driving? Like, yes, but I can hear all this stuff going around me and it's amazing. I don't know. It all just seems a bit gimmicky for me for the roles that they're putting in. It has very good uses.
Yeah.
But I'm just not part of that world.
Yeah. Your Mercedes stereo while you're listening to your Aerosmith album from 1978. It's not, the Atmos is not working, is it?
It's still a car that you're listening through.
And you're still listening in a car. Good point.
It's a car.
Yeah, it's a car.
Yes.
It's not a studio. It's not, a treated room. It's a car.
Yeah. With road noise and the wind going by and your kids screaming in the back. Yeah, absolutely. I touched on it right at the beginning, and when I was looking through your website, which we'll obviously put a link to on the podcast, there's the Xbox logo and Nintendo Switch and a couple of others, and I know someone through someone who works for Riot Games, and it's one of the things that I think I hadn't realized how much music is done for the gaming industry. And I know that sounds stupid, but when we talk about music, we go, you release an album, you're an artist, or even film or TV. But the gaming industry is massive, isn't it, for music and compositions and that sort of thing?
It's huge now. I mean, you should look at Ian Livingston's website and look at his credits. I mean, he's been going for quite a few years now, but the number of games that he goes in, wow, okay. And just, the amount of money now that goes into, full orchestral recordings, the whole lot, it's massive budgets. Whereas before it was, I'm not a gamer, but you would have to, you were restricted, weren't you, by the technology of how much music you could fit in or whether it was generated by a chip in the game. So you couldn't even record anything. And the low quality that was used, or loops, small little loops. But now, the soundtracks that people listen to whilst playing the games are amazing. And also for session musicians, I think, singers and solo instruments, that there's just that budget to be able to really bring these the game creations to life with the music. And it's very much part of it now.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because Warren was saying how budgets for making music have gone down dramatically from, back in the day where they hired a studio for 3 months and sat in there doing whatever they wanted. And, he was saying that budget's gone down. And obviously for gaming, the budgets have grown massively for the audio and sound in.
Yeah, well, it started from a low place. So
it did.
It has gone up. But then also there's a frustration, I don't know, for you guys, how talking about money with artists and composers, but composers particularly, it's like, how much are you getting paid for this? You're doing all of this work and you're getting that? Oh, okay. or they've got a reasonable budget, and it's like, yeah, we spent most of that on going for the live string, orchestral recording. So it's all often done in the hope that it will bring more work later. So even though there might be a budget, often the composers they're not swimming in cash at the end of a project, unless you're one of the top ones, which aren't that many in the world in that sense.
Right.
I feel like that's such a special skill of composing for music and television and gaming that they could respectfully just be like, hey, you want us? You got to pay us more. Right.
The problem is there's always somebody who will do it for free or cheap.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's that is the rub right there.
You don't get a plumber doing that or something. Well, This is my price and this is my emergency £100 call out fee. Oh, well, no, I'll go and get another one. Oh, and they've got a similar setup because you need to be paid.
Because you can't find a plumber on Fiverr, but you can find I quote, mastering engineer.
Yeah, and again,
quote mastering.
Well, that's weird because, I mean, I look back when I started, I had no idea what I charged, but I know, was it like 5 or 6 years in, I doubled my pricing because you learn about pricing and you also get rid of the not so great clients who, even though you're giving them a low price, they then want it lower. Mm-hmm. And I'm really just not charging a lot here. But for composers, yeah, when you learn what they get for certain projects, it's like, wow,
that's crazy. Because I'm sure with any art, like even live music and whatnot, if you're, sure, somebody will go and do it for free, but the people that can do it really well, and I guess that a good composer would work really well with the director and all that stuff, and a director has a favorite composer maybe, and so I feel like somebody who's a composer, like they should be asking for more money, like the good ones,
Yeah.
Even in live music, I play out at different venues, and I see people all the time undercut how much they want to get paid, and yeah, you're gonna lose some venues, but that because they won't be able to pay for that live music. But if you know your worth and you know how good you are, your worth, then you'll find different venues that will pay what you're worth, and sometimes even more. I've played at some venues, and they're like, "We're going to pay you $150 more." And we're like, "Okay." Mm-hmm. They just volunteered that because you guys are so good, So, don't undercut yourself if you're a musician or an artist out there.
Yeah, and being a professional, I think, for whatever we would charge, is that, well, there's a friend of mine where I said, well, is this, I can't remember how I got to there, but it basically described as what she was doing. Is this a hobby?
Yeah.
And it was just like, that was quite visceral. I said, no, it's not a hobby. And from that point on, it's like, this is not a hobby. And her approach to charging is just so different now because it's no, this is a job. And there were Tesco supermarket drivers here, and their hourly rate, there was a big sign when I went into the shop, and it was, I think, $13.75 an hour or something. I was like, are you beating that? Because otherwise you might as well go and get a job driving a van. And it's like, oh, and if you actually just put into hourly rate all the time that you've charged for the small amount of money that you've got, it hurts. But you need to go through that process, and you can't suddenly ramp your prices up, but you have to be on a journey, maybe a year or two, of just, okay, next job. You keep scaling and finding your level. And there's often referenced, there's a YouTube channel called The Future, Futur. That's a design company and other things, but they do sort of marketing talk. But in there, it was, if you're getting if all jobs that you're quoting for, you're not charging enough. You want to be at about 70, 80% max. If somebody can't afford you, you're too low otherwise. And it's trying to find that ceiling. And it's nerve-wracking as hell. You put a price in, like, but then somebody comes back and they're like, yeah, that's fine. Or they then hire, for composers, you'll get your amount. And then they might then go, oh, we need a soloist in here. oh, well, they're going to be like £500. Yeah, that's fine.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, could I have got more? It's that approach.
Mm-hmm.
But you always hear of directors and it's, oh, yeah, but the budget's there, or like mastering at the end of the process. It's like, oh, we haven't got much money left for the... So you spend all this time, energy, money creating the thing, and there's no money left for the final quality control product bit. And it's like, well, I'd rather not do that. And that's where the attitude's wrong in that sense, I think. And especially when you have a band. I did a demo for a band which somebody wanted me to master for, and they really loved it. But still, between 5 of them, they couldn't come up with the money to do that. And like, it's not that much money, really, for a few tracks.
Right.
And then you think, well, they ended up releasing just their own version, which it was brilliantly recorded, and it was a good mix. Songs were great, but it just wasn't right then at the end. I'm not saying I would be perfect in that sense for mastering it, but investing in themselves. And I think also directors particularly are just in the habit of dealing with composers and going, yeah, budget's a bit small. Can you, oof. So the composers go in low, and then often the amount of work that a composer has to do is mental. It really is.
They get the short straw, do they?
Yeah. I mean, you can think for what they're getting. And if it's a feature film, I mean, a short film, it could be, I don't know, 5-15 minutes maybe. And it depends on the type of score. But if you're doing a small arrangement, fine. But if you're doing orchestral and real creativity stuff and generating a personalized sound, doing, I don't know, 30 to 40 cues, and also just going through and marking all the hit points that they've got that music has to hit. So yeah, it's a lot of work.
Yeah, that hourly rate's not going to look great, is it?
No. And I think any composer, particularly, I mean, I work with, I think my age range at the moment with clients is 19 to about 60. And I love that because you get the range. And also when you're working with young people, God, I sound old. You pick up the energy or remember the energy you had at that age. And it was like, yeah, let's get out there. And I love that. But also I always want to build confidence in somebody. It's like, particularly when you're mixing with them, I was like, oh, am I doing this right? It's like, yeah, but does it sound right? And that's my approach is always learn. I think you've said this in one of your podcasts, or somebody did, of learning your speaker, your room, your headphones, whatever, so that when you make a change and it's like, yeah, that's right. But so if you're not confident in that, but same thing with compressors, you could use all sorts of different types of compressors and achieve a similar sound. There's just different ways of doing it. Or EQ. I mean, there's sometimes I'll do the fake sort of judgment if I'm working on it. It's like, what the heck is that? And they're like, oh no, what have I done? No, I'm only joking. It sounds right. It could be a funny shape, but who cares? Turn it off and oh yeah, turn it back on again. Yeah, nice one. Okay, I just want to adjust it this way, just to do that. I think there's too much pressure that people can put on themselves of, am I doing it, quote, right?
Yeah,
there isn't right.
Yeah, there's a lot to say about that. Certainly I don't like the idea of right and wrong when you're doing this, because it is art, right? And it all that matters is the final product. Who cares how you got there? And when people are recording, no one's gonna hear that you recorded it through a $10,000 microphone and a $5,000 mic pre on $15,000. No one's going to hear that. All they're going to hear is what you recorded and how it sounds at the end of the day on their probably $3 earbuds. Rising that 99-cent price up for inflation. I don't like the idea of saying, well, that's wrong. You've turned that ratio knob way too high. That's incorrect, right? Because it doesn't matter. It's how does it sound? If it's working, it's working.
Exactly. I I always remember somebody said to me, if you'd asked the experts in the day, every single decision the Beatles made was wrong. Where to put the microphones, how far to turn the knobs. They were factually, by those experts, wrong. Yeah.
Lead
I don't think right or wrong has...
ear,
right and wrong has no place, does it? As you say, John, if it sounds right and it's given you the sound, shape, feel you're looking for, then it's right. Just go with it.
Yeah. I suppose going back to Mike's podcast with the which microphone you're using, and very often we have two. I mean, this is a Rode NT, this is one of the original NT1 Rodes.
Nice.
I can't remember if this cost me like 150 pounds or something.
Yep.
Not expensive. I don't know how old this thing is now, but it still does the job and it's right. And I've got a groove tube, which I don't think groove tubes exist anymore.
I don't believe so, no.
But it's like a quite a chunky pencil mic. Now, I've used that on a couple of times and somebody put it on a violin. So I like the sound of that. But that wasn't that expensive a mic. It was on offer. And it's whatever we do. You could have a cheap microphone, but like, where do you place it? And I think my approach when I'm mixing, because I can be quite aggressive, I'm going in subtractively. And I'm also somebody who solos tracks. You know, you get people that you should never solo a track when you're EQing or working on it. You should listen to it within the mix. But when I'm soloing it, I know what the sound of that instrument that I'm wanting in the mix kind of thing. But also I'm tweaking it to make it as if it's been recorded well in the first place. So if you've got a guitar and it's too boomy on the body, or there's too much twang of the strings or something like that, I don't want that as my recording. So I'm tweaking that sound. Is that right? Now, how am I going to finish it off so it works in the track properly?
That's interesting, because that's so effectively you are correcting everything first and then mixing second, if you see what I mean. Yeah, the first stage is you're making it sound how you want it to sound to incorporate it in that track as part of that.
Whether that could be getting rid of some of the room, and how I was taught. Again, you'd be in a studio and you have an engineer who, whilst the soloist is playing, they're moving the microphone around and going, finding the sweet spot, go, okay, there. And I think certainly where I'm dealing with session musicians, where they might have a really good mic and they're putting it up in an untreated room or a slightly treated room and just playing in front of it. Yeah, but where's the best bit? Because every instrument radiates frequencies from different parts in different directions. And also, even, have you seen those big like padded vocal booths? They're like a box. And I've heard quite a few soloists or singers in those, and I just don't like the tone. When you get it in a track, there's just something weird about it. I'm not sure if that's how the microphone is reacting. Well, I don't know. I'm not technically minded. That's where Mike Senior would have to be coming in and going, that's because of this, and the type of pattern on the mic.
Well, I think a totally dead room, while is useful for some things, like say, dialogue, isn't so kind to instruments that vibrate the air, like a violin. Nice, yeah. I play violin. Oh, wrong shoulder. There we go.
Oh,
I play violin. And my room is moderately treated. And I still have to, sort of move around the mic to find where it sounds good, because it does seem to change from session to session. Probably depending on the humidity and the weather, and if the house system fan is running or something. I don't know. But I think too totally dead of a room isn't great. Those sort of like hearing test booths at the audiologist's office, they're insanely dead. I don't know that I would ever want to record something in that. That would be really difficult to do.
Well, it's like if you're recording, say, an acoustic guitar, where you might have a wooden floor, and if you want it really nice and lively, but if you don't, then you put a big rug underneath it to help control that. You're setting up to create the sound. Again, I think it's from your previous episodes, but so what is the vision for your sound? So go from the beginning, where now it's just, stick a microphone in it and fix it later. Whereas you're not committing, where you would go through a mic pre that might have a bit of an EQ and compress it a little, that will be the sound.
Yeah.
Now it's just clean, and then you get everything, work on it later.
When you're recording something, when you're creating a composition, or when you're mixing or mastering, how much of what you do is using hardware, and how much of it is using software plugins?
All in the box.
All in the box. Okay.
I was only ever outside when I was composing. I've probably been 15 or more years now. But in terms of mastering, yeah, everything I've done has always been there. It's been that weird transition where that's acceptable now. And even mixing engineers, the big names where the pictures are taken in front of their big mixing desk, but they've been in the box for quite a while. But it's like, we can't tell people that. Yeah, I'm very much. It's a bit like the analog or vinyl versus digital and everything else. And like, I don't care. Again, does it sound right?
Yeah.
And can I do my job? And certainly today, I mean, there's so much that we can do in the box, so many plugins that you can craft sound with and just bypass things. That's what I always say to people, particularly when I'm working with them. It's like, okay, bypass. How does that sound now? Have a quick listen. And I always love that because somebody really knows what they want, because they're like, oh yeah, that's done this now. And it's like, oh, that's much better. Or it's like, oh no, that's a bit, because I need that in there. Oh, brilliant. They've got that engagement. So they're how to describe it? They're listening and hearing. They just maybe don't know how to achieve it themselves. But then particularly like an online mixing session, they're picking up so many things whilst it's going on as well. Like when we're in, I remember my first mastering session, I'd recorded and mixed a local artist's album. And we went to Northern Ireland, I think it was. And I still use some things there from that mastering session, just watching the guy going, why did you do that? And, just ask questions. And he was really lovely and just was helpful in that sense. So, yeah, we're always learning and picking up tips.
I think that's... sorry.
I was going to say, do you ever use like samples? Like, let's say you're doing a mixing an orchestra. Do you ever find like, they didn't record the timpani very well? I remember seeing an interview with Billy Corgan, and he did the composition for Disarm and the orchestra and whatnot. And when it came to the timpani, it sounded weak. And he's like, nobody knew, but we used a timpani sample. For that song, do you ever do anything like that, or maybe like the strings are they're not full enough, so I'm like go over to my keyboard and like play the part and maybe fill it in, or ask for somebody to re-record a synth part to...
I won't do that myself because that's not my role in that case, but composers particularly do all sorts of things depending on budget or their style. And it could be full orchestral, it could be hybrid whilst adding in some synths and electronics and samples as well. When it comes for me, I mean, if like the timpani wasn't hitting, the bit that I like is how can I fix it? What can I do to it? And that stems from my initial mastering jobs with the production albums, because you'd have maybe 5 to 10 people, different composers, different sounds. I couldn't get remixes. It was like, yeah, we need this done ASAP. And it was about learning the hard way, I suppose, of getting the best out of it. And with mastering, there's always a compromise because it's a yin yang. If you make something brighter, it's not as going to be as bassy kind of thing. It's how the ear reacts. Or you might be adjusting certain aggressive frequencies up 2-3 kilohertz, but there might have been a nice snare snap there, so you might lose that. There's always a game to be played, and I always like kind of maybe sometimes using a different approach that I've never done. Like I said, that UAD plugin, just on this particular synth, we chucked it into mic, turned the gain down a bit, and the reaction was like, whoa, that's nice. And it's like, yep, done, right. But I've never particularly done that. So it's just being creative. And again, does it sound right? Are you happy? And also always bypass. And I don't know about you, but I do the closed eye thing and then multiple taps of the bypass button. It's always quite disappointing when you go, oh no, it's better when it's off.
But it does happen.
It does.
Yeah. And the usual thing of when you're adjusting an EQ and it's bypassed, you're like, your brain does weird things. So
that happens more times than I care to admit.
Yeah. Especially when I'm doing it with somebody and they're like, John, the EQ's not on. Like, yeah, I knew that. I was just testing you. And see,
you're paying attention.
Yes, well done.
It's like the spectrum. When I'm mastering, I almost always turn off spectrum analyzers and that sort of thing because I find my eyes override my ears on a regular basis. I will look at something. I'll have it. So, talked about this on the last one. I've recently moved to Wavelabs for all my mastering. After many years of putting it off because it looks so complicated, and it is incredibly complicated, but it is very good. But it's got at the top right, you've got the blue, orange, green spectrum. I don't know what they call it, spectrograph. I find myself looking at it while I'm listening, and I'm like, I've got to stop doing that because I'm supposed to be listening. That's the whole thing of the job, is listening. So the number of times I will just put that on, I don't know, history or anything else that is just a bland, nothing to look at audibly about the audio, because we all get distracted, don't we? You know, it's EQs that have got the frequencies moving around while you're doing it. It's so easy to be distracted by the moving image rather than what you're hearing.
Yeah, and I think with, particularly EQ, I use FabFilter's Q3 so much
because it's amazing.
And
it's great. Yeah.
But I suppose for me, I often hum something, or resonant frequencies are my worst thing. I often think, is it just the way that my brain hears these frequencies and nobody else does sometimes? But they'll be like, oh, there's doo, 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 that there's a tone there. Yeah. And it'll be around this frequency. And then you're like, okay, then you can see it and you can hover over it. And I think it's this one. Yeah, that's it. But if you start looking at that, you go, oh, there's another spike and there's another spike. And you can just really get distracted. And then they do too much work.
Yeah,
I totally agree.
Yeah, you certainly don't have to kill every single spike that you see, right? You know, some of them are the fundamental of that instrument. And if you take that away, then the instrument goes away.
Yeah, I totally agree with that on the spikes, though. It's very easy to look. I agree, FabFilters is amazing. But it's very easy to look, especially in mastering, I think, and think, I've got a problem here because there's a spike. And you haven't got a problem there because it's fine. Just leave it alone. But it's so funny. I do the same as you. I'm there going, I can hear this. It's like, right, I can hear that. Where is that? What is that I'm hearing? Yeah. But it's very funny. Sometimes my wife will walk past going, why are you making strange noises? Like, I'm fine. Just leave me alone. It's fine.
Oh, sometimes that's
weird stuff.
Oh, good. Sometimes that's part. Sometimes that's part of the tone too. Like, I was listening to, what was it, STP, and Interstate Love Song. That's what it was. And the snare,
Pilots.
Yeah, and the snare in there. There's a in the snare, and so now that's all I hear is. Whenever the snare.
I've always wondered that about songs that I hear. I hear things like that too, Neil, and I'm like, okay, this was recorded in, maybe the mid 90s, and maybe they didn't have a surgical EQ because this was done on a console and straight to tape. And, I wonder, like, was this a trade-off that they said, well, it's there, and there's just, we don't really have the resources to deal with it, or it's too much of a bother to try and put it out. Yeah, just go with it. Whatever. I wonder if that's the conversation they had in the control room when they were listening to that.
Well, I suppose it's because there are still some songs now that you hear in the charts, and it's like there might be one frequency. I mean, it's been a hit, but nobody's ever cared. It's my particular thing. I don't want to hear that. So many people won't. But the worst thing for me, going back to either self-recording or session musicians who haven't got it an optimized sound. Particularly if I then receive that with reverb on, because the reverb emphasizes it. And it's like, can I have it dry, please? But if what they've done to it and with the reverb is the track, and I can't add that reverb, then I've got to work with that and compromise. But whether I don't know if it's right or not, but I like getting rid of the crap, as I put it, of just that, don't like that, I want that. And also, what's, like you probably, with what is that instrument doing in the track? So I suppose my main thing when I'm doing orchestral stuff, when you've got a question for you guys, when you've got the brass section, French horns going for it, what are you generally hearing when they're really blasting? What's the tone?
Oh, what a question.
I think my favorite thing about brass instruments like that, when they're just like going full bore, and it's like there's this sort of like this almost distortion type quality in like the lower mids that's just like
just like of it.
Yeah, it's just that it almost sounds like a foghorn, and it's just like vibrating every bone in my body.
Hearing that texture of the brass.
It's a texture. That like low mid texture that's just distorting, but it's distorting in the most beautiful way, because I think the instrument is being pushed to its limit.
Yeah, and you've also got that with that sort of crackle, or often I say it's like the fart of the brass instruments, that the zingy, lovely top end. Very often it's because they're at the back of the orchestra and they've got to come forward with their sound. But when we're doing with samples particularly, you've got a lot of like 100, 200 hertz or something down there. And it's like people then will turn it up, but it's not very bright. Like, yeah, but I want the horns to cut through. So I'm going to be doing something to the top end or reducing that lower end. So, and you might have a certain resonant frequency that's like, woo, every time that note comes out. And if you've got a big orchestral recording, I really want that brass to sing so I can get rid of those lower tones and maybe even actually scoop them out on certain parts or low cut them, and then just have that energy, maybe then a little bit of saturation on some of the parts, so that when the brass really goes for it, it's got like that zing. Add that then with the reverb. And so it's sort of creating what you think it should sound like from what you've got, not actually, well, this is the samples or the recording, so it should be great. And we'll just turn it up. So crafting the sound, isn't it, for what we want it to do?
Definitely. So it's always one of the things that I know Neil and Nate speak about always. Whenever we talk to people, it's the love of exactly like you've just said. It's the love of creating that craft. It's the sculpting, the writing, the composition, and it's whether that's writing it in the first place or mixing it or mastering it. All of us have this same sort of enjoyment of creating that thing, whether that's the sound of the brass coming through or the final song or the how the album feels after you've mastered it, so it all feels like one contiguous thing. That's my word for the day. Slip that in. And
nice, well done.
So yeah, I think it's always great when we talk to anyone on the podcast, is that, and I think that's the bit we hope sort of people take away is there's no right or wrong answers. No one's trying to create perfection. And if you are trying to create perfection, you should definitely stop. It's about creating the vision that you have for whatever it is you're doing, whether it's the master, the song, the album, and getting that across to people to listen to.
Yeah, and creating your own sound, because, well, particularly in the world of AI, perfection can be created with just a push of a button. And the companies who are doing the AI, they're just about making money. They really don't give a rat's ass about the music itself. It's just, how can we create this software to create this, to bring in the money and make a successful, ever-growing business model. It is about the fun. I like, as you've probably seen, it's that thing of, I want to get that, oh, what's that? And I want the client to be able to go, that's so much better. I've also had some emotional tracks where people have done things and you make the person cry because they couldn't achieve what they wanted, and you've been able to help and give it back. And there's a relief. They've released that because it was so special for them. It's emotional work that we do at times. Often it's fast paced and you don't get the time. Like for me, I tend to, it's like, what are you working on at the moment? My brain is just, you're always turning over, and I've got about 6 projects on the go at the moment. And I've got 2 that have paused for a week or so. I'm still waiting for an update. And then you go back to another one, and they're all different each time. So I sometimes don't get to just enjoy, but that's when I'll dump them onto my phone. And then when I'm in the car, I'll actually just get to listen to it and go, oh yeah, and just listen rather than working on it, and truly sort of relax for myself, I suppose. Because I don't know about you, Ben, but when I master and send it back, I'm never totally happy. Well, I am happy, but was there something else you could do? Or there's always something you could do. But it's usually a week or 2 later, and I listen to it, and there's no, yeah, I'm happy with it. Yeah, cool. Okay. And it's just like, I've then properly put it to bed. It's way too late. Can't do anything about it. It's being released. But it's just my internal way of, have I done the best I can? And I'm good at what I do. And we're always learning. And if, I love talking to other people or seeing what they do, because, what's that? And I've probably changed, particularly on the mastering. There's an approach that maybe every 6 months I add or swap something out or do something different because you learn something else. It's not that it's right or wrong, but you're just like, I want to do that now. And
well, it's growing. It's applying, what you've picked up and trying it out. And if it works, great. You've moved a step forward, in your craft. And if it doesn't, you've also moved a step forward because you've tried something out and you've deduced that that's not for me. And I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing, or I'm going to try something else that might work.
And it would be boring. Otherwise you'd become a factory then, wouldn't you? Because if it's just like, do this, chop that in, a bit like, I say the people I work with want to be involved, and it is a collaboration. It's not like you send it off and then it comes back and you have to accept it. It's like, I say, how does it feel for you? Because it has to do that thing. And I'd never want somebody to just accept what I've done. They should be able to come back and get sort of that customer service in that sense. And I always say, for me, I do fixed quotes and it's unlimited. I mean, if you've literally got to 100 revisions, then something's wrong and you're not the right person for the job. But you shouldn't even get to 100 at that point.
100? I'd say you shouldn't even get to 5.
Well, no. But it's usually that 1 or 2 you can tweak, and you're understanding what they want for their preference.
Yeah.
But it's just giving the client that confidence to go, I can talk. I have a voice. My preference is what's important. It's not about me. I mean, I'll have my own thing. That's what I think this could sound like under what you've told me. And it could just be something like, I'd like it a bit more this or that. Yeah, sure. Right. How's that? Oh, that's much better.
Right. Yeah, totally agree. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I'm exactly the same way. Work the same way. I'll send send them the master and say, look, hey, I think these sound great. Let me know if you need any changes. There's no judgment on it. Let me know if you want anything changed.
That's what you're paying for, isn't it?
Yeah. It's getting, you said it earlier, it's so that the client gets the end product they want. That's at the end of the day what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, and I think you've said before where it's an experience is what we're selling.
Yeah.
And it's a bit, I don't remember what I read, but it was about, how you might write a thesis or something at university or do a PhD. And it's not the thing that you've written, it's the work creating the thing. And I suppose it's almost like where we did classical music exams. Yeah, I did all of that sort of up to grade 8 or so. And you had that competitive. Did you get a pass of, what's the middle one? pass something distinction. It's like, did you get a distinction? Now, when you go to uni, so, oh yes, I got a distinction at grade 8 and these and these. You didn't? Oh dear, you're not very good. And basically later in life, it's like, yeah, you just said, I've got grade 8. You're not even thinking about what level. It's not important,
right.
But it's the work there. And, I'm just lucky. I don't play the piano that much these days, but when I do, I've put so much work into it. I can still play quite well. And I'm like, how can I do that? And what we do on the music front, what we create each time, being professional, and reputation. I mean, that's so important. I suppose that's the thing I always worry about. Well, not worry. I don't really worry, but it's that, is the client happy? They have to be.
Yeah, exactly.
I think it's whatever, like you said, making sure the client is happy, and whatever that takes, aside from 100 revisions, whatever it takes.
We might draw the line at 100, 99 maximum.
99 revisions.
Hundreds.
Well, I've had 11 as my max on a mixing one, but that actually worked out where the track was too busy for the artist, and it was like, could we just take that one? Can we do this one? And he ended up taking about half the stuff out. And she was so apologetic. I was like, I'm sorry. It's like, probably took me an extra hour, because she was so clear. And it was every day, at this point, please do this. And I literally 5 minutes just to load something up, send it back. So that was very specific. And I never mind that, because that's just good communication.
Yeah.
It's when you get people going, oh, I don't know. And, oh, that's, and then you send it back, and then you've done a few revisions, and then they kind of, well, I kind of like the first one now. And
yeah.
Okay. So, but that's part of the job as well. It's everybody's different.
Yeah,
it is. Well, look, thank you so much for your time today. I can appreciate it's a Sunday evening while we're recording this on a bank holiday weekend here in England. So we have at least, hopefully you've got tomorrow off as well. I know I am.
Oh, no, I'm working.
You're working. Okay, so not bank holiday. Today.
No, it's not. It's a weekend of working for me. So,
fair enough.
No, thank you very much for that. It's been very enjoyable, and well done on your the podcast so far. Because I said earlier it is just very enjoyable, very relaxed, and the tone that you all have. I mean, just looking at you on the screen here, you just look so relaxed. It's amazing. And for somebody from my side, being on a podcast, it's like, inviting, really lovely. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much
for the compliment. I appreciate that.
Have a great rest. Hopefully you're not working too late, given it's 5:30.
No.
And have a great rest of your weekend. Thanks so much, John. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Ben, Neil, and Nate. Absolute joy to have done this with you. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, John.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Enjoy the rest of your weekend.
And you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to Sound Discussion. Your hosts are Ben Holmes, Neil Merchant, and me, Nate Kelms. Our theme song is composed and recorded by Jojo Timmerman. You can find us on the internet at sounddiscussionpodcast.com, or you can drop us a line at sounddiscussionpodcast@gmail.com. Additional show notes for this episode can be found on our website or in the description area of your podcast player. A big thank you to our guest for taking the time to chat with us today, and to you, the listener, for taking time out of your busy schedule to be part of our discussion. We look forward to having you join us again next month on another episode of Sound Discussion.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's good. What the heck is that?